Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we're going to take a look at the new development update, The Road to Shadowlands, by Watcher, who's the lead game designer, or game director, of World of Warcraft. This looks to me like the last major piece of Shadowlands update that will still contain changes, big changes to how the game will work. So let's go through it and hit each point one by one. I'll talk about what's happening and give some opinions, although for the record, there are a lot of parts of this that I've already shared big pieces of opinion on. I'm not going to revisit those too heavily. I'll call out to where there are previous videos, though, where you can go and find my takes on those. Those largely haven't changed, but I'll talk about where they have. So first of all, introducing 9.0.2. This is basically irrelevant for the main piece is that there's going to be two patches for us to download instead of one. One's going to be the pre-patch patch, and one's going to be the actual expansion patch, looks like. So not a big deal, I don't think. Alt leveling. This is a cool one. So they'd already announced that alts were going to not have to do the leveling through campaign, and you could just already start at max level on your alts. And they've clarified and changed a little bit how exactly that's going to work here. So instead of your alt being locked into this experience, you can now opt in to either the original first character playthrough or this new game plus mode where your character gets that campaign already finished and then can already pick a covenant and start accumulating renown and stuff. For most players, it's going to be a better option to choose that second one, right? So instead of having to level up and then pick a covenant and then start earning renown, you can do all those at the same time. Like you can pick a covenant as your first step and then start leveling up and earning renown and doing all the covenant progression at the same time. So that's going to be more efficient, right? You're going to be doing those forms of progression in parallel rather than sequentially. But if you are particularly interested in test driving the different covenant abilities, then you may be interested in doing it the other way. Or if you want to just go through the narrative story campaign again, they've kind of clarified exactly how this is going to work, where you will just, instead of having all those narrative quests available in each zone, you will actually just autocomplete all of those quests, and all those zones will be placed in their post-campaign phases. And then if you go back to the zones, you'll instead have bonus objectives and story-wide or zone-wide objectives to do there, but the story of the zone will already be finished, so you'll basically be, teleporting to the end narrative-wise. This seems like a good solution here. It seems like a good way to make this kind of alt experience better. So pretty cool. I think the alt friendliness of this expansion is looking pretty good. Torghast progression. This was something that actually there was quite a bit of. I was a little bit worried about this one from the perspective of somebody who was likely going to play multiple characters fairly early into this expansion, because I'm going to be maining a tank this expansion. So there's a good chance that I'll be getting a couple different options up to level 60 fairly quick. And on beta, there was this kind of Torghast purgatory phase where you were doing these multiple Torghast runs that weren't really full feeling, and they were just kind of it did feel like 5 or 6 successive tutorials, and they've restructured that so you just do a single introductory run, gets you access to the Rune Carver, which is the guy that makes your legendaries, and then after that the other quests to find Jaina and Thrall in there. Spoilers, by the way. They put spoilers in here and they didn't put a spoiler warning though, so whatever, you just got spoiled, I'm sorry. It's gonna now be that those aren't tutorially, they're just kind of part of your you do full featured Torghast runs, and then once you've done all those quests, you got the Twisting Corridors, which is going to be the challenge mode wing of Torghast. I haven't really gotten to play enough of this. I haven't really played any of the Torghast recently, since quite a while ago on beta, but hopefully this gets tuned to the point where, so 18 floor runs, it's a challenge because if you build your character right as you go through Torghast floors, you get really, really overpowered really quickly. Well, not really quickly, but at the end of a 6-floor run, your character would often feel kind of invincible. And so it's a really big challenge for them to tune this challenge mode difficulty, right? This Twisting Corridor 18-floor difficulty, so that it is possible and not just something that murders you in the first couple floors, but also something where you don't get to just be full build after 6 floors and then breeze through the other 12, that was the experience of early Torghast on Alpha, when there were infinite floor runs, is you would, you'd do it on the hardest difficulty. The first 2 floors would be a living hell where any mob could potentially kill you. And then you would start getting your build together, and then you would just breeze through all the way up to floor 70. So this is a big challenge for them to balance, but I'm hopeful that they have ways of doing that, that let either that, make it so that you and the difficulty scale at a roughly similar rate, and make it so that it is both doable and impressive to complete an 18-floor run of this challenge mode wing. All right, covenants. This is of course, the biggest, most important thing that is being talked about here. Although at the end of this, I'll talk about a big important thing that wasn't mentioned at all in this post. But covenants are basically this is a long justification for why there will be no changes to the covenants here. To me, it seems like this was probably the last opportunity for there to be such a ripcord pulling event before the expansion launch, some kind of compromise being reached here. And instead, this is more of an explanation for why it's going to go live the way it is. I don't want to really relitigate the arguments I've made why the covenant being tied to your power level in this form of a permanent choice will, I think, be a negative impact on the game. You can go watch some of my earlier videos if you're interested in hearing those. I do want to just quickly do a little bit of pointing out here, something that you should be able to agree with me on, even if you disagree and you think that covenants are going to be cool, is that there has been a little bit of a moving of the goalposts here in terms of what we can expect. So let me set the stage for this a little bit. There was this Preach interview with Ian Hazakostas, watcher here, about Shadowlands quite a while ago, where they were discussing the covenant system. And Ian said, in order to make us as players feel a little bit less apprehensive about the permanence of this choice, was that the fallback option at the end of the day of removing all the restrictions and, okay, you can just mix and match and you can switch this stuff more freely. If we need to pull that ripcord, it exists. That was a quote from that interview. So that was basically designed to make us not as worried about covenants, because if they came out and were bad, they had a plan to pull this ripcord and with low friction fix the system quickly, right? It was like, hey, we're going to try this, but if we need to, we can pull the ripcord. Now, if we look through here, let go cord. All right, here's the quote where the goalposts have now been moved on us a little bit. In short, pulling on that thread, or cord as it were, would unravel the entire fabric of the system. So, either of these quotes can be true, right? Either of those things can be true, but they can't both be true. It can't be true that they have a ripcord ready to be pulled, as an option if we need it, but also it'll unravel the entire fabric of the system, right? So they're trying to get the benefits here both ways of us not being worried about covenants because they can fix it immediately, but also they're not going to pull this cord, and we shouldn't think about that as an option that we have because it'll unravel the entire fabric of the system. So that was just a little thing I noticed. As soon as this post came out and I read this, I had this idea. So I forced myself out of bed to go and make this meme so I could share it on Twitter and get a lot of clout about how there's not actually ever been a ripcord. So if you go look at my Twitter, you can retweet this and help me get some more clout. That'd be appreciated. That's a good meme. That's the covenants, though. Let's move on to PvP itemization. I'm not a PvP expert. I will probably do some PvP if there's good rewards gated behind it. I've done that in the past. I've PvP'd up to 2100 a couple seasons for when there's been rewards gated behind that. And there's a good chance that that'll happen again in at least some of the seasons in Shadowlands, depending on which PvP items are good. And it seems like the PvP people, from what I can see, are pretty happy about the changes here. I am not anywhere close to an expert, so I would advise if you're interested in the PvP itemization front, go and watch some of the AWC casters or players. A lot of them have YouTube channels, and figure out some opinions based on that. I can't really offer any on this one. Sockets. While we eliminated Warforging and Titan Forging in Shadowlands with the goal of increasing clarity and player agency over rewards, the question of how to handle sockets was not quite as clear-cut. So sockets constitute power, can be every bit as impactful as Warforging, definitely true. On many slots, a socket is worth, in some slots, sockets are going to be worth maybe 30 item levels, and in some slots, they're worth maybe 5. And it kind of depends. There's a couple of weird different ways that sockets can scale between those ranges, but the basics are the lower the stat budget is of that piece, so something like bracers, gloves, where there's low amounts of stats on them, sockets are worth relatively more on those. And then on stuff like pants, chest pieces, back when chest pieces could have sockets, those are where sockets were less important because each 5 item levels on those pieces came with way more stats, right? So the item levels would be more important relative to the sockets there. So to balance out all these considerations, they're keeping sockets as a random item property. So items can still effectively Warforge with the socket. But players are going to be allowed to add sockets to their items via a consumable sold by Venari and the Maw, similar to gouged eyes. So this, I think, is a good system as an idea of making it so that your items drop and then you can get lucky and have them drop already upgraded, or you can work through grinding stuff in some way and upgrade them that way. I think that that's a really good place for basically all power on items to land, is in a spot where, you know, you can get them to be this or very close to it through grinding or through luck instead of through just one or the other. Although if I had to choose which I'd prefer to keep, I think I'd prefer the grinding, but I'm actually, I don't mind RNG and loot as much as most high-end players do, so I'm maybe a little bit of an outlier in that. And then this way, all players can take advantage of gems, and seeing a socketed item drop offers a short-term efficiency advantage, but in the long run, competitive players can still make steady progress towards a best-in-slot gear setup without relying on an additional layer of randomness. So there's a really interesting thing here is, what are they going to do in patch 9.1, right? Can we stockpile this currency and then buy a bunch of sockets and then hit the ground running in future patches and fully socket our gear? Because if so, that's going to be the best way to play. And if not, I don't know, it's going to be weird. It is going to be weird because we're going to come out of each patch with like a fully socketed set of gear. Also, the whole competitive players thing, like for the ultra competitive end, not much is going to change probably, right? Like gouged eyes of N'Zoth were not relevant for world first progression, and they weren't really relevant even until like, I don't know, April or something. So a lot of like top 100 guilds, I don't think had any gouged eye based sockets in Nihilotha progression. So I'm curious to see where they're going to land here. And to me, the biggest warning sign would be if there is an incentive to stockpile, which there was, for instance, with Titan Residuum at various points in BFA, which I see a couple parallels to that system. But also, it's another pretty easily fixed system by... It's not elegant, but like you can just make the gouged or these items only apply to items of or below a certain item level, and then when the new patch comes out, you wipe the currency and increase the item level on the things sold by Venari. I don't know. I don't. There are a lot of different ways to solve this problem, but I hope that they do, because I hope that we don't just come into each patch with 20 of these things grinded and then apply them to all the items we get and just have all socketed items, because I think that would be kind of silly and be a lot of annoying grinding to do in advance. Finally, in order to limit the total impact of gems and the power gap between players with full sockets and those without, only helms, rings, so that's 2 slots, necks, bracers, and belts can have a socket randomly generated or added by Venari. So this is interesting. As I mentioned earlier, these are a lot of the slots that sockets are really valuable on, right? So sockets on these slots, I would say, are probably going to be an average of about 15 item levels. It's probably about that 10 to 15 item level Warforge or Titanforge effect to get one of these sockets on these pieces of gear. But also helms, rings, necks, bracers, and belts. That's only 6 slots, right? So it shouldn't be too much of a deal to grind out 6 copies of this consumable, hopefully, depending on how it's priced. All in all, I think I'm pretty happy to see this socket go in this direction. I think this is a cool way to take it, and I think that this is a cool way for them to, they've kind of shied away from RNG and gear, understandably, based on the kind of, it built up with Warforging and then Titan Forging and then ultimately with like corruption. And now they're kind of, the pendulum is swung back towards gear not really having many random qualities at all. But I think that at some point, the pendulum is probably going to swing back towards randomness in gear in when gear drops. And I hope that when it does, they can take these lessons and give us these sort of deterministic paths to items being good to complement the random paths to dropping an already good item. Anyways, that's about it for this post. The one thing that I wanted to point out that was absent entirely from discussion here was the AoE cap. That's the other thing that I'm largely concerned about going into Shadowlands. So I hope that there's still discussion being had about that. Otherwise, my concerns about the AoE cap, and particularly about the impact it will have on the ability of a lot of specs to transition from casual play to like high-end Mythic Plus, if those players wanted to. I think it's going to be a pretty serious brick wall in the path of players who have those kind of ambitions or who develop them over the course of the expansion. So I hope that that is still something that's being looked at, but it seems like it's not. I mean, this is by and large a good set of changes. All of the things that have actually been changed here, I think, are very reasonable looking, very good looking changes. And then, of course, I still disagree with the Covenant system in the state that it's in. And I did want to point out that little bit of rhetorical trickery being played on us to make us kind of to move the goalposts on the Covenant discussion. Anyways, that's the end of this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about all these changes in the comments below, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Remember to like and stuff. Bye.